of that kind of out of the way, I want to get right to the topic of today, which is how do we actually use jobs to be done in our own work? We've had conversations about jobs to be done in the past, but what I especially like is talking to people about jobs to be done and how they actually use it at their own company, because really, depending on what company you're at, jobs to be done in one place versus another place, it might be different flavors of it. So I think it's always interesting to see how people are actually, using it, how they got started with it, how it's actually working. And that's exactly what we're going to get into today with Nash, who is the founder and CEO of Undock. And Nash, I'm really glad that you're with us today.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Glad to be here.
Yeah. And Nash, maybe to get started, I actually already know because I asked you, but for everybody else's sake, where in the world are you tuning in from today?
New York City.
Awesome. Very cool. It's probably similar weather to Cleveland, I bet. But I know I saw some other people in the attendee chat from New York as well. So
Yeah,
um,
it's about 75 right now. I've been checking with Alexa, and it's been going up. It will get up to 82 today, so I'm excited about that.
very cool. Very cool. So, Nash, maybe to get started, if you could give us the quick background about Undock. I know you're in the middle of a series of product launches right now, so it's busy days for you, but I think that'll give good context to everybody else as well.
Sure. I'll give a little bit about my background as well. So I'm Nash, CEO and founder of Undock, and we are building the most powerful calendar in the galaxy. It helps you instantly schedule, host, and document your meetings. And the first piece of the product that we released works like autocomplete. As you're typing, you'll see suggestions for meeting times. It's that simple. Myself, I am an engineer, went to school for computer science, kind of gradually was drawn towards design, and turns out that I'm a pretty okay designer. So between my expertise in engineering and my hobby, I guess, of design, I figured I'd try my hand at product, having a bit of a leg up. I believe having an engineering mindset and the design mindset for building product is I think it's my only competitive advantage that I have there. So that's me in a nutshell, and that's the product that we're building right now.
I love it. That's awesome. And I know, I mean, one of the cool things, you sometimes see product launches and it's like, hey, we're on the top of product hunt.
Yeah.
And I think you were too, but you actually had like a full-on launch event and are having more full-on launch events, right?
Yes, that is correct. And that also goes back to my experience. So I've been in various industries, and music production was one of them. And I also dabbled in video production. So I'm like, well, I have this skill set, and I'm building this product that I think almost everyone will have some value that they can extract from it, whether they're a really busy person that has a hard time managing their schedule, or they're the person that wants the time from the really busy person that has a hard time managing their schedule. Because we kind of run the gamut of who we're solving the problem for and what value we're giving them. So I'm saying to myself, well, how can I make a lot of noise for this product? So, I like to make videos. I like to edit them. I put them together. And also, apparently, I like acting. It was my first time. The last one, I did a little bit of acting in the beginning. It was kind of fun. So, uh, it's really internally a good forcing function for us too. Everybody gets excited. They make sure the product is tip top shape. We're meeting a hard deadline that cannot shift. Like once you put it out there that you're hosting an event at this date, it has to happen. And we're still in the startup phase. So it's not like we're putting something out there 6 months down the line. Like the first event closed, I'm like, all right, 3 months later, we're having another event. You got to ship all this stuff. Let's go. Come on.
Love it.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'll get the details for that event. And I'll share it with everybody when I follow up today. So that will
fantastic.
be cool. I will say, the session again about jobs to be done, and it's kind of been a hot topic, I'd say, these last couple few years. Whatever it's been, for some people, they might have an inkling of, they might be experts at jobs to be done, but some people might have an inkling, but they're still kind of learning. Maybe to get started, what does jobs to be done mean to you? Like how do you like to define it personally? And then maybe we could get into how you've been putting it into practice.
Yeah. So personally, and I hate using the cliche, but the Ford saying that if you ask people what they wanted, they say they want a faster horse, and really what they needed was a car. But I like to take that even further, and I do this in every single exercise and every single feature, every single function that we're building. And I even go, well, I'll go to the second part first. So it's not what is the very next thing that we can give them? For me, it's what is the last thing that we can get? What does this look like in its real end state? All right. So let's take scheduling, for example. Okay. The immediate solution is let me have somebody schedule something for me. All right. Let's find a cheaper solution. Let's get a bot to do it, like X.AI or something. Let's have a bot do that, right? And then you're like, okay, so I'm interjecting something here. It's helping. It's getting in closer and closer. But the real solution, which we're pretty far away from, is if I want to meet with somebody, it just happens, right? There's enough information out there to extract a few times it's going to work, a few locations it's going to work. It happens. So our job to be done, particularly, is make the scheduling of a meeting a complete and utter afterthought. So the only friction in the process is deciding who you want to meet and if you want to meet them at all. Once that's done, like you're over that, the job is get the meeting on the calendar. Done. All right. So that's our job to be done. So I think taking that initial framework of like, okay, what's the solution? It's like, no, how far out into the future can you predict, at least technologically in our case, can you predict like what the actual solution will be? And in this case, it's asking an all-knowing, omnipotent calendar god, when should we meet? And then getting the answer immediately as you're typing. So that's what we're trying to deliver there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, it does, when you start to think of it in the context of the job that needs to get done, it does help you think about even what you're offering, think about it differently. It also makes you think about maybe this isn't the right thing to offer or something else should be offered here. So I love the way that you're teeing that up. Well, I guess going back to just even the concept of jobs be done, why do you or do you think that it's often misunderstood? And if so, kind of what leads to that?
It is misunderstood. And well, let me rephrase that. And I just came up with this right now. So the person in the position of figuring out the job to be done also has a job to be done, which is what? Figuring out the job to be done, correct?
Right.
Right. So if they're not doing that next thing, which I said, which is go further and further down the line, if like, oh, what's the first thing that looks like the job to be done? I'm going to grab onto that. And that's what we're going to label as a job to be done. And that's not the effective approach. So the person in that position has to say to themselves, okay, this is the first thing I thought of, or this is what some focus group or whatever we put together came up with. Don't take that and run with it. And I do this all the time. In what ways is this wrong? Right? I'm just going to dig in. Like, I think it's right. Everything's, in what ways could this possibly be wrong? Or is this going to a far enough extent of an improvement? Is this a 2x improvement? Is this a 1.5x improvement? Is it a 5x improvement? Is it over engineering? Does this solution even need to exist in this way, shape, or form? And that's the question. So I think it's not really a hard concept to understand or to grasp, but I think maybe going for the first bone that's thrown your way will lead you to, not actually finding the job to be done.
Yeah, it sounds like you have like being able to dig in, very deep with whether it's interviewing a user or just even with the data that you're getting from users. It sounds like that's really important. So I guess maybe if you could talk about your experience putting it all into practice, like I'm sure people might want to understand, like, how did you get started even? Like, what are those first steps even look like, especially, in launching a brand new product like Undock?
Yes. So before talking to any users, and I know this isn't the standard advice, like, okay, you think you have an idea, go talk to some users to validate that idea, so as to not introduce any misdirection in what I was building. I didn't talk to any users right out of the gate. I told them generally what I was building, but I wasn't looking or seeking feedback. And the response you get is, "Oh, cool, yeah, I would like something like that," right? And then I just sat with myself, thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking. And really, my framework, which maybe I'll write about, is I always tell myself I'm wrong, or whatever idea I just came up with is stupid. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's never going to work. Right. And if you can keep hammering away at it's wrong, it doesn't make sense, it's not fast enough, it's not good enough, what's the better version of it? You're going to end up in a good starting place. Right. So before I talk to users, I wanted to get myself as far down the track of what I think is a good idea. Right. And then I started talking to users and then started shaping it like really tightly around the feedback that they're giving, not directionally saying, hey, you should build this and you should build this, but things like, oh, well, I'm going too much into product detail here, but there will be pieces of feedback that you was like, oh, you know what? I completely missed this. Right. And this is important. So I'm not actually going to implement it exactly what you said, but I do see how this is a problem. Now I'm going to take that problem that you presented to me and find what I think is the next best solution for it.
Yeah. And how often do you work with users? I mean, it sounds like in the beginning stages, especially those customer conversations, those are really important. Do you sometimes people ask like, well, gosh, do I need to do 100 of these before, I'm kind of
Yeah.
uncovering information? What does that look like for you?
You should be doing a lot and a lot more than we do now. So we had multiple phases. So the first phase, which again is not recommended for anyone, and I'm probably more fortunate than smart for doing it this way. In the beginning, I didn't show the product to anyone other than our engineers, and then I started giving demos. And then as I'm giving the demo, which I knew I was like sort of on the right track, but then some things were alarming to me. As I'm giving the demo, very early demo, and Undock did a lot more in the past than it does now. Very early demo, the feedback is, wow, this is great. It does this and it does that and it does this and it does that. I would use this right now because it replaces this tool and that tool. But then the immediate feedback is, oh, can it do this? And then can it do that? And then it can do this and can it do that? So in that case, the original product we were building, or at least initial version of it, it strayed too far away from solving the initial problem to being like this amalgamation of tools, right? And then that problem it was solving was not having to jump from tool to tool to tool to tool to tool, which isn't exactly what I was looking for at that time. So then I took a step back and then narrowed the product down a little bit more, slimmed it down, and then was able to identify and define it as calendaring experience and scheduling. And that ever since I did that, it's been such a relieving feeling as I'm building the product. So yeah, and so that first phase didn't talk to anyone, then started giving demos and getting feedback, and then went back to the drawing board, said, no, this is what we're going to build based off of that, because I'm actually not solving the thousands of tools problem. I wanted to solve my availability problem. So focus on the availability problem, then built a brand new version, and then started talking to you a lot. I think we met 100 users in about 2 months in the alpha phase. And then for the first 3 or 4 months after it was out live, we probably met 10 to 15 users per week. And now we're maybe 2 to 3 per week, but I like to kick that up again once we unveil the next version of the product, which is again a significant upgrade.
Yeah. So I'm kind of hearing a couple things, but maybe make sure I'm catching it right, which is in the beginning, yes, you want to talk to a lot of users. In your case, over 100. Like that's a decent amount, in a span of a couple months. But it's not like we're talking to 100 users and then after 100 conversations, we're analyzing the data. It seems like an iterative process. It's almost like talk to a few, kind of analyze, talk to a few, analyze. Is that true?
Yeah, I tell my co-founder all the time, because he has a different opinion. I'm like, you're not going to get really anything quantitative back from even 200 or 300 interviews, unless it's like egregious, like 250 out of 300 people said, I can't stand the way the product does this thing. Right. So you're definitely looking for a qualitative quality of life and user experience feedback on there. And that's like the biggest changes that we made from the first version to the second version was around that. It wasn't what it did. It wasn't necessarily how it functioned. It didn't change the scope of the product at all. And most of the feedback that you get, hey, can I do this? Hey, can I do that? Like, yes, it's already in the roadmap. I'll let you know when it's there. It was really about like, I want people to download the product, easily understand how to use it, form a habit around it, love using it, keep using it, share it with their friends. Right. So that's the goal. So that's what a lot of the interviews are about. So I'm extremely opinionated on product to the point. I'll give a perfect example here. And this is not even around the scheduling component, which is what I mainly talk about. But we also have built-in conferencing directly on the calendar. And I've long held, and I'm looking at myself right now on camera and trying to look away. I've long held, I'll turn my self view off. I've long held the opinion that self view being default on is actually a negative experience for immersion, right? So if your goal, especially in this pandemic era, if your goal is for a video conference to feel the same as an in-person conversation, last time I checked, you don't hold a mirror up next to the person that you're talking to in real life,
Right.
right? That's not part of an immersive experience. Yes, now
Right.
we're vain, we can see ourselves, we're checking ourselves. That's the unnatural behavior. So in our default conferencing experience, your self view is off. You can't pin it onto the screen, and the only time it comes on the screen is if you shake your mouse a little bit, and then you can see your self view, and then it fades away. Right? That's a really opinionated thing to do. Right? So my team is saying, "Hey, I want to see myself." I'm like, "Cool." Like I can see myself on Zoom. I'm like, "Cool." I can see myself on Google Meet. I'm like, "Cool." We're going to be extremely opinionated on this. I believe in the long term, I'm going to be correct. Self view default on is just how it's been done for decades or 15 years or so. But I think it's not going to be the permanent way. And now you've seen in the last 2 or 3 months, Zoom, Google Meet, and all these other platforms are like, "Hey, are you feeling fatigued by seeing yourself on camera all day? Here's a quick way to turn your self view off." I'm like, yes, that should be the default. So that's an example of, not a particularly great example, but a good example of sometimes you need to be opinionated about something. Like think about the
Yeah.
logic behind it, right? And say just because it's been done this way for X amount of years, it doesn't mean it's correct. And that's the way we go about the whole calendaring experience. There are things that other calendar companies have built, and people are extolling the virtues of it, saying, "Oh, I literally had this conversation with." I'm sorry, going off on a tangent. I literally had this
No, it's
conversation
all
with
good.
a user about the product. It was about 30, 45-minute conversation, and a lot of the things he said was, "Well, Google Calendar does it this way. And why don't you just copy Google Calendar the way it does that?" I'm like, "Thank you for that feedback." "Well, Google Calendar does this way. Why don't you just do it that way, like Google Calendar?" And he even got to the point, he's like, I don't, shouldn't need to reinvent some of these things. I'm like, well, see, that's where you're wrong. Right. So Google Calendar has a method of getting to whatever that job to be done is, but it's not the fastest. It's not the best. It's just the first version that they iterated on 25 years ago and have barely tweaked
Right.
since. Right.
Right.
So sorry for that.
No, and I'm glad you brought. I mean, honestly, I never even thought of the self view.
Yeah.
But it's a perfect example. Is then if you're doing jobs to be done interviews for
Yeah.
Zoom, way back in the day,
Yeah.
I really wonder how many jobs people might bring up, like, I need to see myself the entire time.
Yes.
I don't know that that's a job that actually needs to be done. It just happens
Exactly.
to be a feature, right?
Exactly. 100%.
Uh,
And it's going to be I put my foot in the ground. I told my team, "You just watch." This was last year at the beginning of the pandemic. I'm like, "You just watch." All right. I'm telling you, 5 years from now, default off.
mm. Well, I have it's a good segue for me. Actually, I'm glad you brought it up because I can't see my face. Instead, I have the Q&A questions above my face right now, and there's actually a bunch of good questions coming in. So
Awesome.
I'm going to take an audience question here and keep those questions coming in, everybody. These are good ones. Somebody simply asked, Ruby actually asked if you could suggest a tool to collect when you're doing your research, sort of collecting the information on whether it's the needs, the job to be done. So yeah, when you're going through these interviews, do you have special tools that you're using? Is it what does that look like for you?
So in two phases, before we had a bunch of users, we were using userinterviews.com, or is it user interview or userinterviews.com. It's a great resource. You can go there. You can do your demographic labeling, pick exactly who you're looking to talk to, and you can schedule a call, an interview with them, and you review it. And I did those sessions with first by myself, and I did it with my UX designer as well. And yeah, it's very easy, straightforward, right? So that's one method. I also use Product Board to like lay everything out, and it helps you with these planning matrices and prioritization, all those other things. As far as like research, um, I I know this is going to sound bad, but I've been in a very similar industry for a very, 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 very long time, and I know all of the bad habits and shortcut solutions that have been developed. So I don't spend a ton of time researching like the way things are right now. So there's that.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought that. One of the questions I had was if there, and you kind of brought one up right here, but like mistakes that you see people often making when it comes to jobs to be done, or mistakes you made. If there are mistakes looking back, you're like, oh, I wish we did this differently. But regardless, what does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, the big mistake I think I spoke on it earlier. It's actually the first time I'm cognizantly thinking about or framing the mistake in that way is when I started to build the product. And so here's how I got to the wrong version of the solution. So my job to be done was solving for availability in its simplest form. So that's inbound meeting requests, outbound meeting requests, unscheduled, all that stuff, solving for availability. And then my next step was, okay, what are all of the things that affect my availability? And that was email, phone calls, text messages, project management, meetings, conferences, documentation, right? So I said, oh, I'm just going to build it all, right? But again, and that's when I got to those interviews where people were telling me, oh, this is great because it's bringing all my tools together and I can get rid of all this. I'm like, but no, that's not what I mean, I was only doing that for the job to be done of solving for availability. And I said, well, how can I do that better without building out the whole conglomerate of productivity tools, which we may eventually down the line. But the
Yeah.
real thing that I'm solving for is availability. So we're going to keep hammering on everything that touches your availability without having to build the entire planet, right?
Yeah.
So that was definitely
That's
a mistake I made early.
but I love that you're bringing it up because sometimes, I mean, when we're talking with customers, we might uncover all sorts of jobs that are related to a certain problem. It doesn't mean our product has to address
Yeah.
every single one of those jobs. So even if we just, and I'm being general here, but if we just focused on one job, but we did it better than our product did better than any other product that's out there in the world, our product will probably be a success. Like there could be a very big market for that. So I love that you're bringing that up because it's just a reminder we don't have to necessarily do absolutely everything.
Yes, that's pretty much blanket advice that I can give to everyone, regardless of what you're building on. Like, you're not going to boil the ocean. Like, I was the most ambitious person. One investor emailed me and he saw from the little description I had on the website. He's like, oh, so this is like Calendly and Sales IQ mixed together. And I was like, oh, but it also does blah, 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 blah. He's like, so you're building G Suite. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, let's roll it back a little bit. Let's roll it back a little bit.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Like that. Yeah, I got another question coming in from the audience. This question's coming from Michael. It's about the process of finding people to interview. So, he just asks how you find the people for your ideal, how you find your ideal end users. Like, what's the qualification process? I know in the beginning when you were using, forget if you said user interviews, user
User
testing, but
interviews.
one of those platforms, maybe it's different than now. So, yeah, how does that process look like for you now?
It definitely start with, and a little biased, but definitely start with user interviews. They went to the same accelerator as us, and I know
There
Basil
you
is
go.
a
Nice.
good guy.
Awesome.
User interviews is perfect. It really takes, like, you don't have to go find a person on some random platform that falls into this demographic that uses this type. You can literally pinpoint the type of person you're looking for and ask them questions, and they'll do it. Right. So it doesn't, their job to be done. If you're asking, how do I find people? Userinterviews.com. And there are other options that are very similar, but there's a tool that's built. It's a marketplace. It puts you in touch with exactly who you're looking for user interviews. Yes, you pay for it, but the amount of time you spend trying to find people and then interviewing like asking your friends or your family about the product. Oh, it's great. Good idea. Good luck. Or I don't know anything about this. Let's talk about whatever. So definitely go there. And then once you've done that, like, talk about whatever it is you're working on to an extent publicly. And number one, if it's interesting, people will find you, and then those are the people you start talking to. All right. So we've stopped using any service to find people to interview. We have rabid, passionate Undock users that want to see the aspirational perfect calendar for them, right? So they are ready and willing. Like, even like the busiest busy people are like, I struggle so much with my calendar, and you've helped me solve this one sliver of it. Let me tell you what I think about that, and let me tell you what I'd like to see on the full calendar side of it. So that's who we talk to right now. So we don't use any service. We don't put any feelers out there. We talk to existing users, and we talk to them a lot.
Yeah.
But it should be
No,
more.
no, I love that. You mentioned, well, again, Undock right now, it's at the early startup days. There was a question that came in from one of our attendees asking if there's a place for jobs to be done with a more mature product and maybe looking for what's next on the roadmap. So when you envision Undock in a few years, even, do you still see jobs to be done playing a role? What is that? What do you think that looks like for you or just mature products in general?
It has to be, and it has to be the culture of the organization, right? Because it stems even outside of the product. I was just having this conversation last week with the engineering team about bugs and reliability, right? So I'm like, if the job to be done is helping a person manage their availability, that involves their schedule, that involves putting events on their calendar. If there's an issue or a bug around that, you are affecting the job to be done, right? That is now a P0, red flag, DEF CON. Like, this needs to be addressed immediately. So the job to be done isn't only nested in the product manager's job or whoever's doing the research there. That goes to the engineering team, right? That goes to, let's say, a planning meeting. All right, so our job to be done is helping people manage their calendars. All right, the growth side, we're saying, okay, we need to get to 1 billion users in 7 years. Right, so how do we do that? The more meetings we schedule, I don't tell too much about our product, but we see that when somebody is successfully, and the messages we get are fantastic. Someone was using our product for 2 days, right, and said, I never reach out to people, but I have to tell you, you've already saved me hours of work in 2 days of
Wow.
using this product. I love it. All right. So you make a happy customer by delivering the job to be done. You get your growth. All right.
Mm.
25 to 30% of the signups we get are from referrals every single week.
Mm.
25, 30%. And we don't like push it. There's no invite button. There's nothing. Just people using it. A person sees them using it. They look at it. They sign up. Right. So the job to be done is the same for the entire company. Maybe I should write something about that for the company, but
I think you should.
get the meeting on the calendar. That is the job to be done with as little friction and as little time spent as humanly possible. So
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I'm looking at the clock, like time went by super fast. We're already at the end of our time, but maybe as a sort of lightning round question, if you will, like the
let's do
quick
it.
hit, if people were to get one big takeaway from this conversation, what would you want that to be from them?
You're wrong.
Mm.
All right. Whatever your first thought is likely wrong, or at least wrong to some degree. You're not 100% correct. So just keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper at what the actual job to be done is, because this is lightning round. So I'll stop there.
No, I love that. That's great. And I know that others ask questions about like, hey, are there resources for us to learn about jobs to be done? I'm happy to, Nash, maybe afterwards you could send me your favorites, and I'll include that in the email that I send everybody later today. And I'll add a couple of my own too. But this way people can, now that the topic is fresh, people could kind of hit the ground running and keep learning about it. But yeah, so Nash, I really appreciate the time that you spent with us here. If people
Absolutely.
wanted to learn more about you and your work and Undock and all of that, where would they go?
I'm not that interesting, but if you want to learn about Undock and follow the journey, that's at undock.com, undock.com.